Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Are you all right? Have you all had a delightful lunch? And you've mingled and you've networked and you've gossiped about work with colleagues and all of that stuff that happens at lunchtime. I hope you have. Good, okay. Let's get into it then. We are back for our session, which is going to be about moving towards an interconnected transport system. So we're going to be addressing that for the next 90 minutes. For many, this is the holy grail for transport, but of course, we've already heard so much about the need for a systems approach. You can't really talk about it being the holy grail then. Maybe it's one for another discussion. What we're going to do first, before we get into our panel discussion in depth, we are going to hear from Rufus Boyd, who is the lead director for the Great British Railways Transition Team. Rufus is going to make the case that rail is the backbone of an integrated transport system, but that right now, and I think we probably all agree, it's not in the best shape. Is it, Rufus? Right, I'll leave it for you to define a bit further. So we'll find out from you what needs to happen to make it more fit. Rufus, coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That rather obliges me to change the first 3 paragraphs of my remarks, just to put all that to bed. No, look, thank you everyone. Indeed, I am Rufus Boyd and I lead the Great British Railways Transition Team. I have been working, indeed the whole of GBRTT has been working for quite some time now, it has to be said, with the Department of Transport and industry partners to deliver a once-in-a-generation solution to rail reform. And we've had numerous discussions around the hall today, I know, about the aspiration, holy grail if you will, for an integrated transport system. For our local communities, this is indeed what drives prosperity and growth in towns and cities up and down the country, and does, of course, make sustainable improvements on the prospects for our planet. It also aligns very clearly to the ambitions. These are the strategic objectives of government and the ones they've given the rail sector. Today I want to take 2 perspectives on the challenges of integrating transport with rail with other modes, a short-term view and a long-term one. Now, rail has for a long time been described as the backbone of the transport system. It has fixed infrastructure and, broadly speaking, fixed timetables that do most of the heavy lifting, with the more flexible modes docking in with it. In a geographical sense, we still need other modes to come to rail. The problem with this reality is, of course, it breeds a certain complacency in the rail sector, which is why all of us who work in rail must actively work towards making rail more accessible, in all meanings of that word, and easier to do business with. So I will come on to the long-term opportunities in a bit. But first, I'd like to have a quick look at some of the immediate matters at hand. So if you just bear with me. So what you have seen probably in various documents, but I'm going to lay out before you again today, is the huge financial challenges facing rail. One of the problems we've had with rail is we don't actually measure our performance very well in terms of finance, and what we don't measure, we can't manage. This is quite an existential issue for us. So what we've spent the last couple of years doing is working to bring together a single view of industry finance with profit and loss across track and train, infrastructure and operations, from the highest to the most granular line of route level. And what you're seeing in front of you today is the high level picture. This is actually for the first time in a generation that this has been created, and it's created some really, really positive reactions from leaders in train operations and in network rail alike. The fact that we have not had this simple business tool as an industry speaks volumes of just how much work we've got to do. So what are we seeing in front of us here? Well, substantially, rail's operating subsidy last year, remember this is not to date, this is last year, was 4.4 billion. That is materially larger than it was pre-COVID. And just for clarity, if you can't read the very, very small bits of the of the dot points underneath, that is the DfT managed operators and Network Rail infrastructure. It doesn't exclude Scotland, Wales and enhancement expenditure. But what you can see is you've also got another problem, is not just the subsidy levels being materially higher, but a material shortfall in revenue. And we'll come on a bit to that later because it's hugely important to the challenge of integration. I would put it to you, and certainly HM Treasury says it pretty well, this financial position is simply not sustainable. It's my belief that this will be true of any government of any colour in this election year. There are many, many more priorities that the current government will want to put above the rail sector. So we need to get more people taking the train and deal with the problem at the top, and we need to do that at an efficient cost, and that's both a unit cost and indeed just the cost of doing big business. And that matters to all of us in the room, even if you're not primarily here to engage with rail. So let's talk a little bit about revenue. You'll often say rail, you hear people saying that rail revenue has recovered, and in a certain sense it has. Nominally, we are on or about pre-pandemic levels. The graph attached to this shows you that the recovery has been very, very meaningful in the leisure sector, but very much lower in the business sector. And that is an important thing. If we're going to grow revenue, we have to acknowledge how much the market has changed. What is really important to know is the deleterious effect of inflation on our revenue performance, and that explains why that whilst we're at 96% levels, if you add inflation and take the extremely positive news about the Elizabeth line as being not a like-for-like comparison, we're actually about 3/4 of what we were pre-pandemic. The good news, of course, is some people are benefiting from this. We've had below-inflation fare rises, which have suppressed our ability to recover revenue. But the bad news is we still need to find a way to fund the sector. So what's happened clearly is habits have changed. The leisure is very important, but also the working pattern change. And people talk a lot about Teams meetings, but actually it's also the impact of people having a very hybrid attitude to public transport. You know, you will go not for a single purpose, but you'll blend a day with work, leisure, personal business, and so on. I'm sure this type of chart, though, would be familiar to others who are involved in other public transport modes, and even to a certain extent the car. So rail needs to adapt, and across the sector we are trying to do just that. Now, in a tight spot, you've got a couple of options, haven't you? You can either drive your costs down or work to increase revenue. As you will have heard, my proposition to you is you have to do both. My colleague Richard Moody, here in the front row, will be speaking about our work on growing rail freight, which is an important part of the mix of what rail does. He'll be doing that tomorrow morning in the Wicked Challenge. But I'm going to focus my remarks on passenger. Last year, we undertook a major piece of analysis about what was stopping people travelling by rail, and therefore what were the opportunities for modal shift. This is ultimately why we're all here, isn't it? 8,000 people capturing details on about 33,000 trips. Now, our analysis of this and our evidence base suggests there are literally millions of journeys that we could go at by achieving mode shift. We just need to make sure we chase the right horses. So what you've got in that very, very faint pistachio pie chart to the left is evidence that even excluding active modes, rail has about a 4.5% share. Interestingly here, I've used mobile phone data to illustrate this, evidence that there's new ways of capturing learning and analysis. And it's quite important to understand that that's a useful tool for us, because so much of what we've done on analysis has been back-solved from ticket sales, which is not a perfect representation of the actual. But 4.5% leaves you a huge slice of pie to have a go at. So what's stopping people making that shift with that low share? Well, then if you move to the right, what you start to see is what respondents are telling us for rejecting rail. And I think it's worth saying that the key point is that the very largest one is end-to-end journeys. And the problem with that is not really in rail's control. We'll come back to that. Beneath that, to a greater or lesser extent, the rail sector can address those issues directly. But I would also put it to you, even on things like fares reform, with all its complexity and natural kind of inward-facing nonsense, we still need partners to make the very best of getting out of that and chip away at that modal shift opportunity. So these are the priorities we've set ourselves as a sector to get a go at that opportunity I said in that pie chart. We have a problem though, and that's the fragmentation of the sector. It's the large and obvious consequences of fragmentation that you see in some of the stupidities of indeed things like rail fares and ticketing types. And that's precisely why we've all set out on this journey of reform. We don't yet have GBR, the fundamental underpinning of it, but we do have a draft bill and we do have pre-legislative scrutiny, so people will be able to see where we're going. In the meantime, we really have to coalesce the leadership of rail behind some priorities and see what we can do to incentivise them to get at that revenue opportunity. So I don't really have enough time in the time allotted to go through all the detail, but these are the priorities. Improving performance, making ticketing simpler and better value for money for any individual journey, optimising capacity or indeed increasing occupancy, bringing a consistently great customer proposition and improving comms and quality of information, including when things go wrong. So that goes to the heart of we're not quite there yet, doesn't it, in terms of the things we have to solve. Now, these are national priorities, but they also need a local response, and I think it is worth saying that we are working locally to make things different. The framework we have developed has brought a number of organisations together, and in reality, this is the kind of balance of what we are doing. On the left hand, a pretty kind of national sale marketing campaign with a sales pitch. Very effective, incidentally, great returns on investment, matching what you would expect in any major consumer organisation, 3-to-1 ROI. And on the right-hand side, you see a very local solution which is bringing together the work of GBRTT and the Metro Mayor here in Manchester to create better outcomes on the B line, including what we call generically pay-as-you-go models for ticketing systems where there is a pilot. And that's terribly exciting for me. It's great news for customers who can take advantage of these things, and it's great news for the industry because it does play back into the top line of the business. And all against really quite a difficult backdrop for us. Rail is doing the right thing. Now, retailers are also coming in behind us. So you will see people like Trainline absolutely backing us, but also new entrants like Uber, who've done an extraordinary amount of work to push people to their website, which actually just reinforces the investment return we make when we set out to do these things at a national scale. On the right-hand side, as I said, PAYG, 90 stations in Manchester and the West Midlands, both are trailblazers for us, unlocked through partnership working and announced earlier this month, if you were paying attention. Now, these pilots mean a simple experience for customers, tap in, tap out, often sold locally as bringing the benefits that London has had for years to you here locally. That will allow seamless travel, the integration we're talking about here, bus, tram and train, and, for example, in the Swift card in the West Midlands, but in Manchester we're expecting the integration into the B network. Now, just a short review on the long-term activities, because I said we'd take two views, because we have to tackle the rail finance issue, and as I said at the start, greater integration is predicated on the backbone of Britain having a sustainable future. So, turning to the long-term picture, our research into mode shift found, if you recall from that first slide I showed you with the bars, that actually the biggest barrier to rail was how far or how difficult it was to access train stations either at the start or the end of the journey. And that means people will choose another mode. So I'm not dewy-eyed about this. Rail can't actually solve all the problems, but government's strategic ambition to meet customers' needs means we must find a way to integrate with other modes to achieve things that otherwise would be doable by car. Now, if we do that, I think we unlock a pretty broad-based solution for Great Britain, both local and national growth, and I know that's another part of government's broader agenda, and a great outcome in terms of decarbonisation. It will be quite material, and it will resolve road congestion, at least in the short term. Now, back in the 1970s, for those of you with good eyesight, and on the left-hand side of this slide, you will see a British Rail advert, which absolutely addressed these issues head-on. We've known this for decades, and it's really about turning understanding into action. As it happens, I was in the public affairs team at BR shortly after these adverts were put out there, and you'll see the phrase very clearly there, the backbone of the nation. It was understood then that rail would do the heavy lifting. So what's needed? And I think the answer does start with some of the rail reform work and indeed some of the things that we are doing to bring forward benefits. Now, I spoke at the conference previously about strategy as the common currency of our institutions, our planning institutions, and this is how we integrate rail's expertise with the ambitions of mayors and local authorities and others. GBRTT is developing a long-term strategy to help us achieve the national objectives. This will be supportive, not directive, and it will be underpinned by analysis which everyone will be able to use, or, as we are currently doing with colleagues such as those from Transport for the North, we will use their analysis where it is right for our needs. This will foster the right joined-up decision-making on multimodal journeys, in my opinion. So we've got a draft rail reform bill, we've got pre-legislative scrutiny, but as many have noted, this will not in itself likely lead to legislation and creation of GBR in this parliamentary session. So what are we doing in the meantime to get on with it? It's not impossible to make incremental change, and we were written to by the Secretary of State asking us to pursue some recommendations we had made to him on simplifying railway processes. And this is a very practical issue about improving what happens at stations where we have currently pretty unnecessary and complicated and indeed expensive processes for getting very, very simple things done. Putting in bikes, putting in an EV charger, with things for station change, landlord's consent, minor modification notices. It is a real bureaucratic muddle. And we are intending to streamline that if we're given the nod by the SOS, and we will do that absent legislation because it matters to people in this room. It does sound rather dry, but that's how it is sometimes. But it will be passengers, and indeed to the extent they apply, important to freight users as well. A quicker, far less expensive process with real opportunities. Finally, the thing I think we can get ahead of, absent legislation, is pushing decision-making down from the centre to the locale. That was very much at the heart of the Williams Review for rail, but we need to get people doing it now. Whether there's money, a lot of it, or none, or a little bit, it is still better that decisions are made closest to the customer. And I've seen that hunger for that in the city regions. So we very much want to make that happening, and we're getting ahead of that issue by setting up regional partnerships, including here in this city, and as previously referred, the West Midlands, but we're extending beyond that as government's ambition for regional cooperation gets ahead. So once created, GBR will take up that mantle, building on the foundations that we have made here at GBRTT with a decentralised approach. And I think that will go, including in Network Rail, down into regions and routes. So finally, and in conclusion, I hope each of you have just had a little something to take away about the short-term challenges and the long-term opportunities and the profound commitment I have at GBRTT to get ahead of legislation and not put everything off, and particularly not put everything off until after the election. GBRTT colleagues are here today in the exhibition area. Please go and see them along with other rail sector colleagues who are also doing interesting and important work because we're all working together to get end-to-end journey times down. We've got a round table, a very popular topic it appears because we're oversubscribed, so make time for that as well. I'm hoping there's a waiting list, otherwise I really shouldn't have been advertising that. So we're determined to seize the opportunity. I know we started a bit late. I don't know what that means by way of questions, but if we can, I'll happily take them. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, are there any questions before Rufus leaves us? Yes. Have we got a mic? Or do you want to shout? Do you want to bellow your question?
David can shout, I'm sure he can.
I'll shout. So I'm David Redgewell. I'm from Bristol, part of the from Western Gateway, but also Western Mural Combined Authority, where I sit on the passenger boards, representing passengers. But my issue is probably around equalities, and everything Mark Harper does, and one of our local MPs talks about access to trains, buses, integration. So I think the question I have is
Thank you. There's a mic for you if you want it.
making sure that we've got fully accessible railway stations, of which even Cheltenham Spa, where I travelled from this morning, or Bristol Temple Meads, or even West Supermare, not fully accessible, big intercity stations. And also making sure the Department for Transport don't put the wrong kind of rolling stock on our local regional metro service. Our mayor, Dan Norris, Labour, spends £35 million with rail, with First Group, but we've got IETs on our local metro trains, which means disabled people put inside the carriages rather than the wheelchair space. So I'm wondering what really GB, and you've got a good team, just to say good team because I work with some of them, what you're really going to do at pushing inequalities and access in respect of which governments forming the government in England and the UK.
Thank you very much, David. Always enjoyable to hear your passion for disability matters. And just to be clear, GBRTT has a functional duty within government to create the National Rail Accessibility Strategy. I am, and this is fingers crossed, expecting the Minister to sign off a consultation on that this year, which will set out clearly the strategic case for accessibility at stations and on trains. That won't just be about level access, it will include other features of the disability agenda. But I think what is important is that it allows other players, local authorities, to say, well, if that's what you're doing and that's what your priorities are, we can join you, we can make it real, we can make it come alive. I think the problem is nobody quite knows. I'm not saying it looks like it's made up. It's quite difficult to understand what the railway is doing, and this will more broadly set the agenda. And I think it'll have cross-party support, so I think it'll survive an election. But a real priority for me, and I'm pleased that GBRTT is able to lead on it.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Rufus. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for that question as well. We are going to zip along because we have another speaker for you, Kerry Bangle, Major Projects Director in the Communities and Mobility arm of WSP. Kerry's going to come up and talk to us about behaviour change and winning hearts and minds, clearly of relevance here. Almost might be the headline message for the whole conference. Kerry, I know, steady on, crikey. So please take the floor, and you're going to be joining us for the discussion afterwards as well, aren't you? Great, thank you.
Very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the post-lunch slump has passed. I'm Kerry Bangle, I'm WSP's Major Projects Director, and I'm delighted to be here again at Interchange in Manchester. I actually spoke at last year's conference as a last-minute COVID stand-in. So I'm really pleased that I'm actually here in my own right this time, having been invited to speak. So I'm here to talk about behaviour change, winning hearts and minds. Well, why? Well, behaviour change is at the heart of what we as transport professionals strive to do. Getting people to shift modes, make different and more sustainable choices about where, when, and how they travel. And as Rachel said in her keynote, we need to get comfortable with change. If we're to make the adjustments needed for a net zero lifestyle, then these can't just be faffing around the edges. A few carbon offsets for the family holiday, meat-free Monday, and lagging your loft. Clearly, it's a complex picture, and transport is just one part of it. But as we know, transport accounts for around a third of emissions, But more than that, it's a gateway enabler into more positive social change. For example, active travel is not only good for the planet, it's good for our bodies, as well as a low-cost way for people to access opportunities. Walkable places are similarly good for the environment, but also excellent for fostering community and social belonging. But behaviour change is hard, and we are stubborn creatures of habit and comfort. My absolute Room 101 hatred is people sitting in their cars with their engines running. They are literally poisoning themselves and the planet, literally burning money. But yet this behaviour pervades, and even when the price of fuel hit nearly £2 in July 2022, still people persisted with sitting in their cars with their engines running. Incidentally, my other Room 101 behaviours are also transport-related, so read into that what you will, but middle lane driving, inconsiderate parking, and feet on public transport seats. But enough of the rant. What can we as transport professionals do to enable and achieve behaviour change? I'm going to set out 5 suggestions and then throw a deliberately provocative challenge at you to mull over. First of all, it's all about understanding. We need to really understand who we are trying to change, how we are affecting them, and reflecting back on my Interchange podcast with Io, who's in the room somewhere, this means we must put people at the heart of all that we do. And I mean real people. Not a complicated value of time-derived transport appraisal rational man. Spoiler alert, he doesn't exist. And in the interest of balance, neither does a rational woman. No, I mean real people with different needs, ages, incomes, travel timings, impairments, and baggage, both physical and emotional. We're getting there with increasing use of personas, which is breaking us out of our able-bodied white male comfort zone. But we have some way to go. The changes need to be made at many levels. A top-down reconsideration of how we appraise projects, including a true cost of carbon and dropping our obsession with values of time. Engaging users in the design process, not just presenting near-final options. Greater engagement with seldom heard groups, especially young people whose voice, with the exception of school streets, is virtually non-existent in mainstream transport planning. And as well as safety and security audits, we need to be giving explicit consideration to gender in design. Research by WSP, my firm, found that a staggering 94% of women have felt threatened when using public transport, which no amount of smart ticketing and quicker journey times will address. So we need to understand the full range of barriers, not just the ones that we can think of. Sadly, in the case of sexual harassment and violence, it begs a far bigger question of whose behaviour we need to change. Secondly, another factor to consider is communication. We need to get better at storytelling, describing a vision of what the after could be, knowing that 74,000 vehicle kilometres are saved every year, or that average speeds go up by 1.5 kilometres per hour, is not accessible, exciting, or relatable language. Authentic and empathetic communication is critical to winning hearts and minds. And a good way into this is by having a diverse workforce to help us check and challenge our ingrained biases and beliefs. During Dry January, I succeeded. I reflected that we need to get better about framing what is gained, not what is lost. And too often the debate is focused on the losses, partly because just that's how the media works, but also because we can easily imagine how awful our lives will be without that free parking space just near your office, or when that handy rat run is rudely closed off by the meddling eco-warriors. But we are less good at describing the positives in human terms, helping people take that leap of faith and imagining what the positives might be. The rub here is that those positives might not be felt by you, but by someone else. I'd love it if cars didn't rat run down my narrow residential street. The drivers whose shortcut it is would vehemently disagree. So we do need to talk about the benefits, but be honest about the disbenefits. Find out as much as you can about what they might be, who they might affect, and what mitigation can be made available. Genuine and early engagement will give a great window into what's needed and the art of the possible. Number 3 on my list is to take a blended approach. There are no silver bullets and no one-size-fits-all, but you'd sort of expect me to say that as a consultant, wouldn't you? Successful efforts to encourage behavioural change blend incentives with disincentives, and there is huge value in a package of place-specific measures. People's perception of what is normal around them is also very influential and important. Think of the time when you hired a bike or used the bus on a European city break, but wouldn't dream of doing the same at home. It's a sort of understated peer pressure which can be used to help change behaviours. Behavioural norming nudges, such as the introduction of green number plates on EV EVs can be used as subtle social cues that change is afoot, and there's a growing gang that you're not part of. Fourthly, it helps if you have a solid start point. There are several aspects to this. Ideally, you would start from a position of trust, which of course you can't magic up overnight, and is increasingly hard to sustain as there are low levels of public trust in the authorities and unprecedented challenges around misinformation and fake news. To make it easier for people to change their behaviour, the alternative choices need to be available without undue friction. Rachel Skinner and I talked at length this morning about the difficulties of navigating the hoops and hurdles of getting carbon-neutral power and heating installed at home. Like an episode of the Squid Games, only the most tenacious and doggedly determined are successful. So my final point is a reframing of a traditional approach. Where we would have seen a problem and thrown solutions to fix it, I would encourage us to frame it slightly differently. Identify the outcome you are seeking, and then garner widespread belief in that outcome. And the biggest outcome we are seeking is, of course, a net zero future. The imperative to tackle loss of biodiversity and climate change mean we are running out of time. Fiddling around the edges is no longer an option. The big changes would need comparatively bold action. And here's the rub. It needs to be by everyone, not just a few. We are all collectively on the hook, but the impacts are felt individually. Those most able to change are probably those who are able to simply buy their way out of the uncomfortable obligations. Claims that Taylor Swift paid more than double to offset her private jet's carbon emissions pale into irrelevance when you consider the supreme opportunity she has to change minds and influence behaviour on a global scale. I talked last April about the Cambridge congestion charging scheme and how difficult it is to introduce schemes that need to affect behaviour change, particularly against a challenging backdrop and, dare I say, political weakness. At that time, the scheme was still in play. Sadly, by September, it had floundered and became a victim of the multi-pronged threats of the ULEZ-induced anti-car rhetoric and the ensuing plan for drivers, the cost of living crisis, an effective anti-campaign spearheaded by a man who was, whilst pretending to care about the poor, honest workers, was actually protecting his own land value, as he subsequently put his central Cambridge business on the market when the scheme collapsed. Oh, and the crucial but fragile political consensus took a good kicking during the summer holidays and fell apart. But as social media becomes near ubiquitous, AI, fake news, and false images more prevalent, and the public gets more demanding, so too must our transport planning techniques. And I would argue that they are not. I was really proud of the massive body of technical work we did for the Cambridge project. Appendices A through U to accompany a transport appraisal guidance and Green Book compliant outline business case. But could it answer all the questions the public and the politicians had about the scheme? No, it couldn't. And I found that as frustrating as them. So, and here's the challenge to you all. I would also argue that we as transport professionals need to take a long, hard look at our tools and ask ourselves whether they are fit for purpose. To change other people's behaviour, we have to change our own. In the ivory tower, many of us have got keys to the penthouse suite. And from that view, we are pretty good at talking to the minds, but we need to do a lot more if we are going to win the hearts. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring you back up. Well, you're staying for the panel, aren't you? Do you want to take a seat? Yeah. Do you need to go and grab something? No? Okay. Yeah, grab a seat. Fabulous. Kerry, thank you very much indeed. A lot of food for thought, and we will get into some more detail on what you've said just now. We are then going to move to a panel session. So let me invite up her other panelists. Adam Simmons, Director of Strategic Planning and Analysis from National Highways. Thank you. Adam, join the stage. John Lauder, a Railway for Everyone Programme Manager at Scotland's Railway. Thank you, John, if you take the stage. Sadly, we won't have Martin Phillips with us. He's unwell at the moment. He was Head of Strategy, so sadly he won't be with us. Chris Sherling-Rook, CEO of Maritime UK. Head on up. And one last seat for Sophie Chapman, Surface Access Director of Heathrow Airport. Thank you, everyone. Round of applause for our panel. Let me come and join you. with some water. Yes, make sure everyone you've helped yourself to some water whilst you've got the chance, and I'll get myself organised here. I'm good. I've got a little bit of a bottle of water here. Okay. All right. So we're coming back to the theme of the integrated issue, right? Because this is the headline of this session. So what I'd really want you to do for the audience is to, in turn, just set the scene from the context of where you are, your organisation, tangible examples of what integrated transport means to your organisation. About 3 minutes. Any longer, I'll stop you. So as succinct as you can, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Adam Simmons from National Highways. We're responsible for England's motorways and major A roads. So I think for me, integration actually starts with something that Kate Willard said right at the start of the day. It's about capable institutions. So I do think it's really important that those of us who are transport operators, we get our network sort of right as the foundation of a good integrated transport network. And that's not just the sort of assets, the operation, the enhancements, although that's important, but really important to think about the customer experience. And if I think about one of the schemes that we completed 3 or 4 years ago, an A14 scheme, yes, it was delivered on time, on budget, it's delivering all those sort of metrics that you sort of have around a scheme. But as Kerry just sort of said, actually, what's really come out across our evaluation is that because this is a part of the network that carries a lot of HGV traffic, one, the truck drivers actually feel like it's a good experience for them, it's a better journey, and people are feeling safe around. They don't feel hemmed in by that. So actually that customer experience is really, really important. I think it's really important, of course, we all think about integrated transport, and that's what we'll discuss today. I don't think actually one big integrated transport strategy is the answer. We probably hear a lot about that. But we think about integration of transport. We also think about integration with things like the power network and how we might provide for electric vehicles and so on. So actually, there's a lot of integration to think through. So I would advocate the sort of every little helps approach. There's lots of things that we can do. Actually, if we all talk amongst our organisations, I think we all share common goals and transport, safe transport, reliable transport, environmental sustainability, good resilient assets, and fundamentally making it cheap as possible for taxpayers or fare payers. So we can do things like we're National Highways working with Network Rail to think about how we can move freight in a multimodal way through rail and freight, and both of us have an interest in that. We can think about saying to government, invest in junction improvements that helps local transport and local road network. And if I was to sort of trail something I think can be one of the sort of things that can unlock integration, one of the opportunities sort of going forward, I would say it's around data and information. I think there's a huge opportunity there for us all to unlock the rich data that we have about our networks and about how people use our networks and how we can provide that to customers in a way that gives them that choice, I think is a real great opportunity for us ahead of us.
Thank you, Adam. John.
Thank you. Hello, I'm John Lauder. I'm the lead for accessibility in Scotland's Railway, I'm in the Network Rail side of Scotland's Railway, but working closely with ScotRail, the principal train operating company. So I lead a strategy, the Railway for Everyone, and that strategy is about accessibility across 4 pillars as we see accessibility. The first pillar is the one that focuses most on integration, and that's how we get to our stations. Second pillar is how we move around inside them. Are they pleasant? Are they safe? Do you feel good when you're in them? The third one is moving platform to platform without the need to use steps. And the fourth is level boarding. In other words, not stepping up or stepping down when you arrive at your station. In terms of integration of modes, the pillar 1, how people get to stations, is crucially important, because over the next 10 to 15 years, the Scottish Government has a very ambitious programme to decarbonise all passenger services in Scotland. Now that means a number of strategic rail corridors are going to be electrified. But what we can't have is a situation where that's simply an engineering project, where we string up electric cables and we run new rolling stock. That's part of it. But what we want is for everyone to have equitable access to get to their station, to enjoy the new experience of an improved timetable, better rolling stock, electrified services. And in order to do that, rail cannot deliver an integrated modal transport system to allow everyone to get to the station that wants to without collaborating. And that means collaboration with local authorities, with planning departments, with bus operators, with taxis and all kinds of other mobility. So crucially important for us is to work in collaboration. And part of our strategic approach is therefore to reset the relationship that we have with other transport providers, because being not indiscreet, but being honest, and I can't be among you, I'm among friends, rail's not always done a bang-up job in working well with other organisations, particularly with local authorities and particularly with planning departments. And we need to improve on that. The final thing that we need to improve on is the relationship that we have with housing developers and other major trip generators like hospitals, universities and others. Because well over half the number of people who come to our stations in Scotland either walk, which is the most dominant mode, or they take the bus, or some of them cycle. And we need to do a much better job in developing those modes, because we've overemphasised driving and parking, and that hasn't risen the number of people using our services. So in order for us to grow patronage, which is the absolute must for us, we need to focus on how people get to our stations and encourage them to get there sustainably, which means focusing and collaborating much wider than we have in the past.
Thank you, John. Chris, you're CEO of Maritime UK, so where does integrated transport thinking fit in with you?
I think it's interesting because we kind of forget how stuff gets here. We live on an island. So 95% of all our stuff, right? Half of our food, 25% of our energy, you think medical supplies, almost all insulin comes by boat. So where there is work to be done is how do we connect the stuff that comes into our coastal communities, which tend to be some of the highest areas of poverty in the UK, sort of fourth generation unemployed, and the rest of the UK. So we have that positive impact. We've been giving this quite a bit of thought over for years, in fact, and we are moving towards some really interesting solutions. We know that, again, it's all about collaboration and working together. As an industry, we employ 1.1 million people, and if we can become more integrated, we know that we can relieve pressure on rail and roads. We know we need to be thinking more about inland waterways. We need to be thinking more about coastal shipping. But then again, as an industry, we produce 3% of domestic greenhouse gases. It's an awful lot. But then when you think about just how much stuff we move, it's actually not that bad. But we need to do more. So there's a conversation to have around net zero ships. And indeed, we have invested heavily in that moving forward. But again, we can't do it in isolation. We need to work with our partners and the roads and rail. And I think, for me, the big opportunity is with people. We can come up with the best ideas and the best technology, but if we haven't got the people to do it, if we haven't got the skills, we can forget about the whole thing. So again, there's a really big focus. In fact, one of the reasons I'm here today is some of the work we're doing with Google. How do we attract kids into my industry? How do we get kids coming into an industry that pays well, you're in it for life, it's not salty sea dogs and dockers on strike. Well, it might be, right? But but it's high tech, it's legal, it's professional services. How do we get these kids in? So again, it's something we've been working with Google on. So sorry if it's quite an elongated answer. Yeah, but there's lots of things to unpick.
There's an awful lot, and hopefully we'll get into more of that in a moment. Kerry, thank you for your extensive kind of viewpoint on everything that needs to be tackled in terms of, the hearts and minds issue. I mean, what else from you briefly would you say are kind of, where integrated transport fits into your broader priorities of what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I've spoken quite a lot, so I don't hog the mic anymore. But yeah, it's absolutely critical in terms of, as we've all said, it's integrating across the silos. My company, WSP, there's probably 2,000 of us working in the transport space, but we all need to join up. And if we're not integrated, then there's really kind of no point getting out of bed, because people can't access those opportunities, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Mobility is bringing people and opportunities to each other, and that's why we need to work together, because it's, you know, children getting to school. You know, we saw during the pandemic, the work we did in Cambridge, how critical mobility is for people. You know, children's life experiences being threatened, narrowed, because they can't get access to the right secondary school because there is no bus. Yeah. You know, these aren't just sort of kind of tiny choices at the edges of people's lives. These are fundamental deciders in these children's futures and their life. Can't get more important than this, frankly.
No. Thank you. And Sophie, you work at Heathrow Airport, Surface Access Director again. Where does integration fit for you?
So I'm responsible for all the different ways of getting to the airport, from taxi and private hire through car parks, and then all the public modes, rail, bus, coach, and active travel. So work with an enormous range of stakeholders to try and improve the offer every year. We've got in 2023 we had nearly 80 million passengers coming to the airport, and we have 75,000 colleagues at Heathrow. So getting all those people to the airport safely, reliably and sustainably is what we're trying to achieve. We've got a public transport mode share target of 45% by 2026. We were at 40% in 2019. So that obviously tumbled during COVID, and obviously everybody wanted to be in their car. So we've tried to sort of rebuild from there, and we're now at something like 43.5% with an objective of 44% for next year. And the big thing that has changed is the Elizabeth line. And I think that really sort of demonstrates that whilst we can do things that change the dial a little bit, so we do things with coach pricing, we invest millions in bus routes, we're doing innovative ways of approaching busing, etc. But you really need big infrastructure to move the dial. And on so we put a lot of time and effort into public transport. Absolutely really interested in hearing you talking about how we get people to use it, because that's almost the challenge now. We spent a lot of money last year to mitigate the extension of the ULEZ zone to include Heathrow. Heathrow supported that because we support the idea of clean air, but we've put a lot of money into it, and we need to make those bus services sustainable. So we need to get people to use them. And on the other side of the house, not on public transport, we also are investing in a programme we have to accept, I think, that customers want to have choices, and sometimes they'll want to drive and sometimes they'll want to take a taxi. So we are facilitating the transition to EV through a separate programme of investment in EV charging and so on.
Okay. So it's all at the heart of what you do, and we all understand that an integrated system is better. It's hugely challenging. Where are the big opportunities that you see ahead that need to be grasped, John?
I think there's a huge opportunity to better integrate rail with bus. Obviously, from a Scotland perspective, under 22s have a free bus pass. Over 60s have a free bus pass. And yet, we don't have the depth of collaboration with local bus services that we could. And there is competition between the modes, and that we accept that. But there's a lack of integration. Timetabling is out. So there's some fundamentals there that just make that a really... It's not necessarily that it's a challenge to bring those timetables together. I think it's a matter of people working together closely.
I was going to say, what will it take?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to be alive to is the level of subsidy invested in rail and the level of subsidy invested in bus, and that the two need to collaborate better, I think, to grow modal share for both, because both are heavily invested by government.
Is there anywhere in the country where that is happening, or where there is a movement towards that happening that actually offers some hope?
Yeah, I don't want to paint too gloomy a picture. I mean, I know I'm a Scot, so I know we're very good at that. But not to overemphasize that, yes, there are some stations that do a really, really good job. And there are some lines. Borders line was opened. It's one of the most recently opened lines. Works really well and collaborates really well with quite a progressive, privately owned bus company. Now, it happens to be that the rail service is running at right angles to where the bus services are running, so the two do synchronize really well. But when stations were developed, they were developed with a multimodal emphasis. So there's good facilities for bus. And I think that's a really good example that we have straight away. We have some stations that work really well for the walking environment in small and medium-sized towns and in city centres. We can definitely learn from them and roll that out more. And looking ahead, Scottish Government this is the first year where 10% of the transport budget is set aside for active travel, in addition to 100 million a year for bus infrastructure improvement as well. So up until now, rail hasn't had access to that fund. And it's not about rail making a land grab for the funding, but it is about working with our partners, because only local authorities or regional transport partnerships can apply for the funding, which means that rail needs to work in collaboration with those bodies to put forward a really sensible, well-designed option to bring modes together, and particularly the active mode and the sustainable mode with rail. So that's a huge opportunity. And we're only just getting to grips with that now, and we have 14 pilot projects currently live. There'll be more, I hope, on stream as we develop and as our strategy gets better known and better embedded.
So does this mean that it's in a mode of, you talking about, are they pilots? Is it in a mode of testing?
Yes.
So it's kind of almost early stages, testing to see which works and then rolling out.
It's exactly that.
Okay.
Perfectly.
Okay.
So, already we've had one casualty, one project's just been spiked straight away. The local authority just didn't have the determination to see that one through, even though it's for us, it's a really sensible option to open up a platform to a new housing development. The level of local opposition to that was sufficient to make the local authority back away. So we learned something there, and we'll learn and we'll come back and develop that type of project better.
Real people at that.
Yeah.
Thinking about what you said, Kerry, real people at the heart of it, and oftentimes, or sometimes, that almost gets
totally
pushed a little bit further down the agenda.
Totally, and I should say, I'm a newcomer to rail. I've only been permanently with the organisation, but I had nearly 20 years with Sustrans before I joined rail, so I know fine well that you need to engage with communities really deeply and meaningfully in order to engage properly.
Okay, thank you, John. Hearing from Rufus, the roads are the problem. So where do you see big opportunities, Adam, around highways?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality there is, I mean, most of our freight, most of our people do move by roads. And I think also it's really important to clock something that I think has come out today, and National Infrastructure Commission have talked about, is perhaps there's a difference between road travel within the cities and National Infrastructure Commission very much talking about the answers there being very much in mass transit. And I think that talks to the poster that we saw on screen. But then interurban, so really cross-country, I do think roads and roads that National Highways looks after are really important parts of that. We do connect the ports and major cities. I suppose talking particularly about freight, I mentioned that I think data and information is a really good opportunity there to facilitate integration and sort of unlock some of the benefits. So something that we're doing as a company is first kind of get our own house in order. One of the things that frustrates logistics operators is inaccurate information about roadworks. So they're the things that can be very, very disruptive. If we can be upfront about those in a good amount of time in advance, and that's accurate, and logistics companies can rely on that, then they can sort of plan their journeys accordingly, and it's sort of an accurate reflection of what the road network will be like. So what we are doing is we're getting that accuracy up, but then also providing those data to wayfinders like Google, Waze, or Apple, and so on, because nobody has the National Highways app on their phone. They do have Google Maps and Waze. So we need to provide those data there, and we're sort of breaking up our data in a way so that they can be broken down, so logistics companies can use them. And I think we're sort of saying that that's sort of providing, that's facilitating choice. So if we can get our network sort of working, if there are sort of good alternatives around sort of for freight on the rail network, and we've done work with Network Rail to look at what freight could move by rail in the Solent to the Midlands corridor, for example. And we're supporting Network Rail in making business cases to improve parts of the network that is a bit of a bottleneck for some of the freight. What I would then sort of add, and I'm not sure I have an answer to this, but I think data can help, is as a road operator, Network Rail as a rail operator, we don't decide what freight moves by which mode. And actually, if you speak to the logistics companies, they don't really decide. It's the customer at the end that says, I want that thing in that place at that time, and that will probably determine how it moves. So I think what we can do then is make sure there's a transport network that perhaps does give a little bit more of that choice and that information, so that informed choices can be made.
Thank you. I just want to quickly look at time, because anyone thinking about asking a question? Just want to get a sense of, okay, yeah, any more? Any more for any more? Okay. All right, we'll come to questions in a little while then. Thank you. I just wanted to check, because if there were burning questions, then I want to make sure that I could fit them in. So, actually, we're on big opportunities, aren't we? What do you see? Are there big opportunities that aren't being tapped into at the moment? Chris, I'm thinking of you in maritime.
I think by more integration and more collaboration, I think we can get to net zero much, much more quickly.
But how? Give me practicalities. What are you seeing?
Well, if you think, I know I'll be talking about this all day. God, I talk about this every day. But we're an island nation. You know, we've kind of forgotten that we have more than 200 ports and harbours. We can get stuff onto coastal ships. We can relieve the pressure on rail and roads. We can do that. And the point is absolutely right. There are so many products which aren't specifically absolutely time sensitive. But I think we're still in that sort of 50s mindset, maybe even 40s mindset, where actually, no, get on the road, get on the rail, and you're going, well, okay, let's remind ourselves where our uniquenesses are. So again, what are the benefits of that? Well, actually, if we then relieve pressure on rail and roads by using our natural highway, which is maritime, inland waterways, we basically reduce our carbon emissions. We create an awful lot of jobs in our coastal communities, because then it's all about the people. Because if we don't have the right skills, we can't do any of this.
Can I tell you something? You know this. I don't know this, and I'm a journalist. So the message about the benefits that maritime can offer in this move towards integrated transport need to be communicated.
You sound like my
so
board.
Much,
you sound like my board of directors.
Much better.
I've only been here 6 months.
And that's what I'm thinking, because, I mean, obviously we know we're in a situation where there's not a great deal of forward planning, and we're coming to a general election at the end of the year, but the messages that you're just giving all of us now surely should be really out there for everyone to kind of better understand.
I think there's almost another whole talk about why we somehow have forgotten our maritime past. You know, your uncle or your granddad isn't in the Merchant Navy anymore, etc., etc., etc. But undoubtedly, we do have an opportunity here. And the UK isn't good at many things anymore, and I hate to say that. But in maritime and logistics and supply chains, we're really good at it. We're really good at it, and we are pushing the envelope. And again, we have an opportunity to tick so many boxes to decarb, to digitize. So it is the use of AI, which is going to be critical in this, to get the cost of living down. If we are moving goods more efficiently, cheaper, actually, yeah, you will see food prices come down. You just will. It just becomes more fluid. And of course, it has an impact on the areas of the UK which are the most deprived, which are our coastal communities, statistically speaking. So it ticks an awful lot of boxes by just talking and just saying, well, actually, how do we integrate more? How do we have that, how do we have that moonshot?
And so, Sophie, I am going to get to you.
Sorry?
I feel like I just need so much more. So how are you moving forward to that then? You know what you've got to do. How quickly are you moving forward on that?
As an industry?
As an industry, yeah.
The first time, 3 years ago, we actually had some support from government. So one of the challenges we have as an industry, we're incredibly siloed, right? It tends to be heavily privatized, which is a challenge and a benefit. But we cannot do this alone. We know we need government relationships. We need government support. We need taxpayers' money to really modernise our ports. How do we digitise them? How do we get them so you can have a boat coming in that's an electric vessel that you can plug it in? It's expensive, but actually when you put it in, it will create jobs and growth. We received our first spending review bid, about 206 million, 3 years ago, which is nothing compared to aviation, automotive and rail. But for maritime, and it's our first attempt, we've matched that, so we have $500 million now. We're now going into the next spending review and saying, what else can we do? There's a huge appetite for us to decarb. Because again, as my colleague at the end said, it's all about the end user. So you're having effectively the shipping lines who are driving this, and the likes of your Tesco's and your Ikeas who are shipping stuff in saying, no, guys, you need to be net zero. You need to be net zero. Okay, we'll react. But it also requires everyone on this panel to completely integrate and to have the full impact it could have in the UK.
Kerry, I'm going to come to you. I want to come to Sophie around what can you see. You're obviously talking about the numbers of employees working at the airport and then also obviously getting passengers in and out. Where do you see any more gains that you can make around integration?
So the first thing I think is data. Even at Heathrow, where you would imagine, we have all these sources of really sophisticated data. Some of the decisions that we make about things like where we put a bus route or whatever are probably not wholly scientific, but maybe based on where we know colleagues live, or those sorts of things. But we're just sort of embarking on a journey to be much smarter, potentially using, getting past sort of privacy issues to be able to use ANPR data to know where people are driving from so that we could then work out what we need to do as a result. Those types of things. So mobile phone data, Rufus mentioned earlier, we could well use that to know where people are coming from and by what mode. So that would really help us to target investment. Another opportunity, I think, is building confidence in public transport. A good example at the moment is the Western route, the Western Network Rail route, where we've had some pretty poor performance, and then, December we had a particularly bad incident that people would have heard about, where trains were stranded and so on, which all just undermines confidence in public transport, not just those that were involved, but those that read about it or hear about it on Twitter or whatever. And then the last thing is around investment and government support for bigger infrastructure schemes. Mark's going to talk about one after this, but we need to be able to get these things off the ground because they're the game changers, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Kerry, where do you see and where do clients of yours see people fitting into this move that we should be making towards integration?
That's not the question I thought you were going to ask me.
Oh.
In my one word, my buses are the one opportunity that we're not maximising was where I was going to say.
Make that point.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Buses. I think we're drawn to big infrastructure. We love concrete, tarmac, steel, and I think buses are probably the answer. To quote my friend Naomi, I love a bus, and we don't use them enough. We don't
love
invest
a clean
enough.
bus.
A clean bus, helpfully, yeah, preferably. But in terms of the overall transport expenditure that we make, it's a drop in the ocean on buses. But the difference a good bus network makes is transformational, and I think we're just missing a massive trick by putting lots of money into infrastructure, and not enough into something that's that we can switch on tomorrow. If you think about how long it's taken the B network in Manchester to get going, the franchising, it's 4, 5, 6 years, God knows how long. I mean, why has it taken so long to get that going? So
I was just going to say, I mentioned on the sort of mitigations against the ultra low emission zone, talking about mobilising quickly. Last year we introduced 12 new bus routes to the west of Heathrow within a year, just subsidised by Heathrow, and did all the contract work and sourced all the buses and got everything running. That is true that that's quicker, but the issue is getting people to use them.
Yeah. But it's a bit chicken and egg, because if they're there, then they'll use them.
I mean, it's a slow burner, that's the trouble with it.
So you've got to be willing to pump prime them for a while, but you've also got to be willing potentially to cut car use, to make space for the buses to be more reliable, and that's the rub.
Bus
You keep talking about rubs.
And you keep talking about rubbing. And all the comms around it in trying to reassure people who may not have used buses before, who don't like using them for whatever reason, that they are safe and clean and a clever, smart way to go. So
one thing
underpinning it as well.
On coach in particular, I think there's a kind of a group of people who do coach and they love it. And then lots of people who wouldn't really consider going on a coach. But when they do, they love it.
It's a revelation, because you can actually plug in, and it's a lovely comfy leather seat and all the rest of it. Yeah, because I was shocked when I went on the coach for the first time in a long time since student days. I used to go back and forth to Leicester on the coach. It's the cheapest mode of travel, and it's far improved, absolutely. It's a comms piece as well, isn't it? I want to have this one question, and then I want to ask you all closing thoughts, because we're running short. We're getting cheekily close to 3. Could we have the mic for this gentleman again, please? And then when you get the mic, can you just remind us who you are, where you're from, and then your question straight in. Thank you.
I'm Dave Redwell. I'm from southwest England. I'm from Bristol, and I sit on the West of England Mayoral Combined Authorities, and I represent public transport and buses, as well as some rail. So my question really is about, in the West Country, we're doing a lot on UK coach. I don't really see the support from Highways England, or not the National Highways, really towards coach. We're investing in a new coach station at Cheltenham, which was once head of the coaching sector in England. Brand new Ars Court. We're investing with Western Gateway, and James is in the audience, in Salisbury.
So is this one for Adam? You're asking about highways support.
It's mainly about what support, and I use Scottish Link in Scotland, but it's not joined up, and we're about subsidised coaches in South West England, where we need to use more coaches, we need to invest in the coach stations, and we need to make them integrate with rail, and we certainly need more support from Transport for Wales, from Transport Scotland, and from Highways England.
So views on coach, we've talked buses, coaches, support in terms of integrating that way. What ideas do you have, or are you working on around that? Thank you, David.
Yeah, and from my perspective, national highways, I think I'm sure there's definitely more that we can do. One example I'll sort of give you is that government asked us to have a think about how the strategic road network can really help with local journeys. So it's a project called about the urban sort of SRN. So a lot of work was sort of done there, and sort of loads and loads of ideas that came up. My challenge to the team was, let's pick a few things to do. One example up in sort of Gateshead, working with Transport for the North East, Transport for the North, sort of local authorities there, identifying that active travel was not great, and perhaps in more that National Highways could do, particularly on our own network, and also to connect sort of local networks. So that is an example where we're getting together with those people. We have some things that we can do. Obviously, the local highway providers have some levers they can do. So I think we are absolutely sort of doing that. I think kind of my thing would be, let's pick a few things that we can really do. I think sometimes if we try and do too much across a broader front, that can somewhat be the enemy of actually getting stuff done.
Yeah, and
we
getting
actually
results.
can do more, but I think we are doing things in that space.
Yeah. John, did you want to say something there? No?
Well, I would agree. I mean, it's dangerous to try and boil the ocean, isn't it? So targeted interventions are the best way. I think where I feel confident, I think we've got a very clear strategy in Scotland. We've got a very clear national transport strategy. We've got the funding being directed to deliver that, and that strategy is all about equality, it's all about decarb, and it's all about people, and infrastructure's at the bottom of that, at least it should be, as it's delivered. So I'm kind of confident we've got that. I'm confident the funding's aiming in that direction. There's always more that can be done. I fully agree. to integrate coach with rail with other modes of transport as well. And I think, don't want to repeat what I said previously, but for me, those local bus networks are really key to how you join people into their local rail station to begin to make those trips, those medium to longer term trips that we'd rather people didn't drive. And just as was pointed out in the keynote, in the West Midlands, 1/3 of people don't have access to cars. It's exactly the same in Scotland. Yeah. And we slightly lose sight of that when we're thinking about transport, and we need to just keep that to the forefront.
Thank you, John. I just want to get from each of you, very briefly, otherwise I'm going to get thrown off the stage. Now, this is without being political. I urge you to try. But there is something that could upset the apple cart, or it could be a vision, a hope. What do you want to see in terms of support, levers that are required to accelerate better integration with the next government? Sophie.
Well, support for rail schemes that can deliver huge benefits across the region and open up the catchment area for Heathrow all round to the south and west of the airport. At the moment, it's incredibly difficult to navigate finding the funding for schemes like that.
Sure. So you'd hope for some clarity around that in that new era. Kerry.
I would say bin the anti-car rhetoric, move away from it. I think it's hugely damaging. It's set us back a long, long way, and get back on the front foot on, on the journey to net zero, and make decisions and stick to them. Because, every time we time major projects, meddling, changing mind, changing goalposts is not good for any form of delivery. But particularly in the transport space, where it takes tens of years sometimes to get a project from start to finish, and every time there's a change, we reinvent the solution.
And it leaves passengers just disappointed, really disappointed.
It's unreliable for passengers, and it's and investors, people don't want to invest in the UK for that reason. Skills shortage, people, there's no incentive for companies like mine or contractors to skill up their workforce if it's a sort of up down of pipeline of
roller
projects.
coaster. Right. Thank you.
So stick to your decisions and
stick to your guns.
Let us get on with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kerry. Chris?
It kind of reverts back to one of your earlier questions with why don't more people understand maritime? It's because ships and ports don't vote. So actually the general public don't use ships or ports. It just keeps the lights on and keeps the shelves full. To be really technical, national grid expansion into ports. Certainly, if we're going to decarb, we need things that our ships can plug into. And the length of time it takes with planning to get that through is crazy. An analogy that, Italy built, 4 new high-speed railway lines in the time it took us just to make a decision and cancel ours.
Oh, don't.
I don't. Being from the Northwest, we'll save that another one. This is my view, by the way, not the view of Maritime UK, any organisation or associated individual. I should have said that right at the beginning, to be fair. We need to unlock private investment. So maritime it's a private industry. So we need to unlock, private investment. And what I mean by that is, if government meet us halfway, we will meet government halfway. We're not there saying, give us a blank check. We're saying, look, we've got some ideas to evolve, modernise, digitise this industry for jobs and growth. And we can do it, but government, we can't do it alone.
Yeah, sure. Get around the table.
Absolutely. And so my message is clear. In fact, it's kind of a takeaway for everyone here. 95% of everything, tell one person, right, after today, 95% of everything comes on a boat. Your food, your fuel, your medical equipment. And we don't realise that. And we can do more with integration.
Thanks, Chris. Quick 2 last points. John, Adam?
Is there going to be an election?
Oh, my goodness, didn't you know?
Yeah, well, it's obviously trickier because transport's devolved to the Scottish government. But I think what I'd love to see in the forthcoming election is, not try to repeat what Kerry said, but a really proper debate about how we can deliver fully integrated and decarbonised transport to begin to meet our climate obligations. That's the key thing. I'd love to see that right across the board. I'm holding out hope that will happen. That's what I'd love to see going forward.
Thank you. Adam.
I'd reflect that for strategic roads and for rail, 5-year sort of planning and sort of funding investment periods that we have now work really well, actually, so let's try and sort of build on what we've got. I recognise other parts of the transport sector may sort of want that sort of stability of funding, so I think let's sort of keep what's good there. I do think there's an opportunity, not necessarily on funding, but just to have a bit of a 10 to 15-year sort of time horizon, sort of way to look forward. I think that's sort of a sensible sort of time that we can start to think about identifying those opportunities across the whole sort of transport network. And I think if we've got that sort of vision, that really helps the investment decisions that we have in the shorter term going forward.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. What a superb panel, everyone. Please thank our panellists. Adam, John, Chris, Kerry and Sophie. Would you like to take your seats back here? Thanks for joining me. We do have a final section before we get to coffee break, everybody. For the final word in this integrating mode session, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mark Livcock, Chief Executive of Heathrow Southern Railway, which is a project that on many levels does embody what we've been talking about just now. So Mark, I hope you are all mic'd up and ready to rock. Do you have slides as well? I do. Okay, shall we just... Oh, great, someone set your first one up. Aren't you the lucky guy? Okay, please welcome Mark Livcock, everyone.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just let one or two people just settle down, but thank you for giving me the chance to briefly talk to you about Heathrow Southern Railway, which I think Sophie had alluded to or mentioned as part of the discussion a bit earlier on. So in terms of what I'm just going to cover during my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and our relationship with Heathrow Airport Limited. I'll talk a little bit about what we think the challenge at Heathrow is, and also how other airports have actually successfully addressed that challenge, explain what we're actually proposing to build, and outlines the train services we think that could operate over the new line, and cover the benefits we think the scheme will deliver. And then finally, hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some questions, but I would say that we do have a stand in the main hall. Myself and my colleague Steve Costello, who is just putting his hand up there, would be delighted to speak to anybody in more detail if you'd like to know more about our particular scheme. So, by way of introduction, I'm Mark Livcock. I'm the Chief Executive of Heathrow Southern Railway, which is a private sector company formed back in 2016. Personally, I've worked in the rail industry for almost 40 years, and I've been involved in both the planning and delivery of projects, including the Felixstowe to Nuneaton F2N freight upgrade, Crossrail, otherwise now known as the Elizabeth Line, and the Transpennine route upgrade. Our company is chaired by Baroness Jo Valentine, and our board has a wide experience in transport, infrastructure, and finance. We have developed and are promoting a scheme for a southern rail link to Heathrow, linking the airport to London Waterloo, Surrey, and Hampshire. We're pleased to have the support of AECOM as our delivery partner and investor. Importantly, we are a separate company to Heathrow Airport Limited, but we do work closely and enjoy a strong relationship with them, and we believe we share the same objectives, which are to transform access to the UK's only hub airport, which was also the largest single-site employer in the UK, and also, as I think we all know, a critical national asset. And also, we believe we can create some new journey opportunities across London and the South East for non-airport passengers. So this slide, and on the top left-hand side, very clearly explains and shows the problem we're looking to address, namely that rail has a very low modal share of transport to the airport from the south. Air passengers and staff therefore rely upon the road network, particularly the M3 and M25, both of which are highly congested, which in turn creates unreliability and poor use of time. The traffic volumes and congestion result in poor air quality around the airport and neighbouring communities. And we believe that Heathrow still remains one of the largest untapped markets for rail. The next couple of slides just sort of show how other UK and European airports have comprehensively embraced rail connectivity. In several cases, airport stations form an integral part of the national rail network. I think Frankfurt and Schiphol, south of Amsterdam, being probably the best examples, where infrastructure has benefited non-airport passengers as well. I won't dwell too long on this slide, but it shows the large number of schemes designed to improve access to the airport from the south over the years, including BAA's AirTrack scheme back in 2009. This plan shows the various route alignments we've considered before deciding on our preferred option. And we've sought to connect Heathrow's key markets with direct services at high frequencies and journey times that are competitive with road, and in some cases better, to maximise modal shift from road to rail. We also want to enable services that are attractive to non-airport users to maximise the revenue and also support the high frequencies to a wide range of destinations. The alignment that we've sought to develop also looks to minimise or avoid adverse community and environmental impacts. So looking in more detail, this map shows the route that we're now proposing to build, and it will be a double-track electrified railway. It's approximately 8 miles long. It starts at Heathrow's existing Terminal 5 substation or subsurface station and brings into use the 2 additional platforms that are currently that were constructed at the same time as the terminal, but currently not in use. It's a largely tunnelled route following the M25 corridor and avoids the famous Egham level crossings, where lower barrier time was one of the reasons that the AirTrack scheme wasn't successful. There are 2 short at-surface sections with at-grade junctions connecting onto the existing South Western Rail network between Staines and Wraysbury on the Windsor branch and between Virginia Water and Egham on the London Waterloo to Reading line. We then use the existing grade-separated dive-under at Byfleet Junction to join the South West Main Line and send trains on towards Woking. We would build a new platform and passenger facilities and multimodal interchange at Staines Station, with associated pedestrian, active travel, and environmental improvements. Our design has also identified ways in which the infrastructure could be compatible with any proposed Western Rail link to Heathrow. So now let's have a look at the services that we think could operate on our new infrastructure. This particular one is what I would call the longer distance train service options. And we have the opportunity to provide various towns and cities in Surrey, Hampshire, such as Guildford, Basingstoke and Woking, with frequent and direct trains to Heathrow Airport. Passengers who change at Woking would then have direct access to almost all of the South West Railway's network. We believe that most of these particular trains will continue to central London, London Paddington, using the existing Heathrow Express paths on the Great Western Main Line. And of course, this would also provide access and serve the new station at Old Oak Common, which will, we believe, provide access certainly to Birmingham, but also hopefully on towards Manchester and other parts of the northwest and Scotland. This map shows how direct services from London Waterloo via Staines could serve the airport. This serves what we believe to be a very important market for passengers and staff wishing to go to Heathrow. And at the moment, we believe that most airport passengers and staff drive. Another important feature to note is that passengers from Kent and Sussex could access Heathrow by changing either Waterloo East or at Clapham Junction. And then finally, we show the extension of the Elizabeth line, which will be extended from Terminal 5 through to Staines. This would connect Staines directly with both Terminal 5, but also Terminals 2 and 3. Also, of course, through to central London and the rest of the Elizabeth line network. And in some cases, in many cases, would offer faster journey times than travelling on the current service via Waterloo. Again, we would also be serving Old Oak Common with access to high speed too. I can confirm and pleased to say that Transport for London are supportive of our proposals, and we're in the process of exploring with them in more detail how we would best integrate the Elizabeth line into our design, both in terms of operations, but also the station design at Staines. This map shows the whole network, or all the locations that would be served by one change onto trains using the new Heathrow Southern Railway line. So I'd like to just conclude by summarising what we believe to be the benefits of the Heathrow Southern Railway. It meets a clear public transport need. It delivers significant environmental benefits, carbon reduction, air quality and congestion relief. Our forecasts see the removal of around 3 million car journeys from the road network each year, around half of which are removed from the M3, M25 corridors. It has an excellent business case, serving multiple markets and de-risking the investment and increasing stakeholder support. We believe we meet both the Department for Transport and Heathrow Airport's strategic objectives for southern access to Heathrow. It also supports inward investment to communities such as Staines. It can be privately financed and can be constructed with minimal environmental and property impacts for a project of this size, delivering this level of transformational benefits. I've put inverted commas, quickly delivered via Transport and Works Act or DCO process. So, thank you very much for your time and your interest in Heathrow Southern Railway. I hope we have a few minutes to answer any questions that people may have in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll kick off with one first of all. So, where are you in the process? So you're saying it meets various requirements and so on. Where are you in terms of making this a reality? Okay,
well, that's a very good question. The current work that we're doing is to refresh our business case. So we're reviewing the costs of the infrastructure construction. Obviously, I think most people in the room will know that we have been subject to construction cost inflation. We also want to make sure that all our infrastructure meets current standards, and also that we are very clear upon the environmental impact of both during construction and the long-term legacy. So that work's going on at the moment. We are also engaging with Heathrow Airport Limited. We understand and we know that they're undertaking a review of their own strategy at the airport in terms of growth. We hope that we can be part of that strategy going forward, and that's an active, ongoing discussion. So I think we hope that we will be clearer in terms of where the project's going within the next sort of 6 to 9 months. And then hopefully we can go towards detailed design and start engaging with both the supply chain, but also potential funders as well.
Great. And from green light to actually cutting the ribbon, the line starting, what's your estimate?
Well, if you want to know when to buy your first ticket to travel on one of our trains, the reality, I think, again, as most colleagues in the room will know, these projects do take some time to design and deliver. My feeling is that if things go well, we would be looking to submit the DCO or a Transport and Works Act order in about 2 to 3 years' time. They typically take 18 months, 2 years to deliver, and then construction would be another 2.5 years. So I think the reality is that probably we're looking the early 2030s, given a good wind and some commitment from the parties that we need.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, we've got a roving mic coming down to you. Run. We've only got 2 minutes.
Thanks very much. My name's Andy Brown. I declare I'm from Manchester Airports Group. I think you just said you're revising your costs, but interested in, I don't think you said roughly where those costs are at the moment and the total cost estimate? And then you mentioned private financing.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in how you envisage servicing that financing, what income streams you'd use to secure that.
I'm not going to quote numbers today, Andy, for a number of reasons, because I think other projects have gone down that route, and you find that the first number that you quote becomes the one that people judge you on. But we are looking at a reasonably significant amount of money to actually build the project. Exactly what the numbers look like, we're working on. In terms of what our business model would be, yes, of course, a lot of our income would be track access charges relating from the train services that we could attract to use the infrastructure. There may be one or two other secondary opportunities, but relatively modest in the scale of things. So part of our work is to do modelling of what we believe the train service pattern could look like, kind of what levels of fares that would support. And as you heard during the presentation, we have a range of different types of train service, ranging from Elizabeth Line, kind of metro type service, to possibly the extension of a sort of premium product in the shape of Heathrow Express. And I think, as most colleagues know, that does attract a slightly higher fare compared to some other routes. But that relates to the infrastructure and the service that's provided. And numbers on Heathrow Express remain solid and resilient. So it's obviously fulfilling a need, and a market is there for that type of service.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. One more question at the front. Kerry Bangle, thank you. And then, I didn't see you with a mic there. You'd already got a mic. Okay, so I just want to be clear. We're in danger of eating into tea break. Anyone who wants to go, but let's get these last two questions, all right?
Hi there. My name is Michael. I live and work at Heathrow. What you've just said there sounds like a best case scenario of 4 years to get the go-ahead. You're going through a cost review at the moment. Then you're going to go through a design process, which is going to take you 2 years, yeah? By the time you go through that, the costs are going to have spiraled again. I don't hear any lessons learnt from HS2 in what you're saying.
Well, clearly we will want to test our numbers robustly. We are doing a lot of tunnelling. That's pretty well core to our project. There are, of course, parallels. Yes, HS2 quite rightly, but also we kind of know that we're pretty well in tunnel throughout. Whereas I think HS2 just kept on increasing the scope of the tunnels as they engage with local communities. We also have some examples with Thames Tideway, which again has been using tunnelling technology. So we will be reaching out to those companies, those experts that understand the costs and the risks around this type of work, and try and ensure that our modelling is accurate, because you can bet your bottom dollar, literally, that any private sector funding party is going to want to do a lot of due diligence to make sure the numbers are robust and resilient. And if we can't pass that test, then we'll be unsuccessful in raising the capital. So that's our challenge, to be credible and have numbers that can be tested, and people can kick the tires, of which some might be in this very room, so who knows?
Thank you, Mark. Kerry with the last question
hi, Mark.
for this.
Kerry, hi.
AirTrack project team 2009-2011. So I am the tyre kicker. Yeah, for 18 months we kicked the tyres on the business case for AirTrack, and I was the one that presented the recommendation to BAA's board to cancel it, so shoot me now. But we could not make the business case work, and it was valued about 800 million at the time, so I don't know where it is now, but that was the capital cost for the scheme. The big bugbear we had, or the big problem, was level crossings on the South West Main Line. That just was a political football. It didn't help that the Secretary of State was MP in one of the constituents at the time. But how do you respond to some of that? I mean, we just could not make the business case work.
Well, we are going back through the numbers again. We're looking at various train service models and fare levels to see what the elasticities are with that. Clearly, it's a balance between providing fares that are attractive enough for people to actually use the service without being too high. That's work that we're doing at the moment, and we don't have the final output of that work. In terms of level crossings and other infrastructure on Network Rail, our design has alleviated the Egham problem, which I think was one of the critical ones, where I believe the level crossings were going to be down for something like 42 minutes per hour, which obviously would have caused quite a lot of traffic delay and congestion in the Egham area. So our design now, basically the tunnel's under Egham and comes out at Virginia Water. But we are conscious, and again, it's work that we need to do with Network Rail to understand all the interface issues on their infrastructure. We're hoping that in many cases we're actually, and this is part of the work that we're doing at the moment in terms of timetabling, to see how we could utilize existing paths to best effect. We're looking to work with current operators to understand a bit more about what the opportunities are, but we're not fundamentally looking to increase the number of trains operating over the current infrastructure, rather make some choices about where those trains go.
Thank you very much indeed for all the questions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank
you. Really informative. Please thank Mark Livock from Heathrow Southern Railway. Really appreciate that.